Meeting number 29 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Of course, you may speak in either official language. When you're not speaking, if you could put your mic on mute. This is for those who are at home or somewhere, not here. And yes, so please put yourself on mute when not speaking. If you need to raise your hand, you can use the yellow hand icon. I'm told, unfortunately, Mr. Letourneau, who was supposed to appear in the first panel, did not receive his headset, regulation headset in time. Therefore, he will be invited to appear at our next meeting, which means we'll have 5 witnesses at that meeting. Alors,
we have 3 witnesses on the first panel. Each witness will have 3 minutes for their opening remarks. We will start with Dr. Madeleine McPherson, Assistant Professor at the University of Victoria. She is appearing in her own name. Madame McPherson, are you there? You have 3 minutes and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Madeleine McPherson, and I'm an energy systems modeler at the University of Victoria, where I lead a team of researchers who develop models that focus on how to decarbonize our energy systems. And really what we're seeing is that electrification of the transport and heating systems is really at the heart of decarbonization. But that only works if our power systems are decarbonized first. So some of our provinces' power systems are already decarbonized. BC, Manitoba, and Quebec are largely powered by hydro. But the fossil-dependent provinces will see enormous wind and solar build-outs to meet carbon targets at a rate that we've never seen before. To get to a net zero power system by 2035, our modeling is showing that we'll need over 100 gigawatts of wind across Canada by 2050. Alberta alone will see about 40 gigawatts of wind by 2035 and over 80 gigawatts of wind by 2050. And this will really constitute most of their energy needs. This is an incredible amount of infrastructure to build in not very much time. This is a huge opportunity, but only if we have the programs in place to train people, supply chains to get equipment, and the policies that streamline processes. And really that only solves one part of our problem, because once we build this system, operating a renewable-based grid requires flexibility to mitigate variability, those times in the year when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. Batteries and other kinds of storage will no doubt have a key role to play, but each of these future high wind provinces conveniently neighbors a hydro-rich province. And this characteristic that really defines the energy fabric of our country is an opportunity that we can't really ignore. If provinces had more transmission linkages, hydro in one province could balance the wind in its neighboring province. Interprovincial transmission connection really is coming out of our modeling work as a no-brainer. The federal government has a critical role to make this happen, though. First, there's the question of funding for that infrastructure, either directly or by de-risking private sector investments. But perhaps more importantly, the federal family can help facilitate a conversation between the ministers and premiers in the provinces. One thing that's coming up in a lot of our conversations is ensuring that rates remain affordable and equitable. And that's really coming out as a huge concern. You can also start the engagement process with Indigenous rights holders to ensure that free, prior, and informed consent happens, and ensure that benefits flows to Indigenous communities, and ensure that this massive effort is a force for decolonization and a pillar of reconciliation. I think there's a really clear role for the federal government to play when it comes to providing leadership and direction on this issue. what's hopeful, I think, is that if the federal government and provinces work together to achieve this, I think we can get to net zero. But we really do have to start now.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor McPherson, for that very clear presentation. We'll go now to Mr. Brian Kingston from the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Mr. Brian Kingston, President and CEO. Go ahead, Mr. Kingston.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable members, thank you for the invitation to be here today as part of your study on clean technologies in Canada. The Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, CVMA, is the industry association that represents Canada's leading manufacturers of light and heavy-duty motor vehicles. Our members include Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, also known as FCA Canada. Canada's auto industry is responsible for $13 billion in annual economic activity, 117,000 direct jobs, and approximately 370,000 jobs in the aftermarket services and dealership network. The industry is our second largest export sector, with $36 billion in exports last year. The auto industry is one of Canada's leading green technology sectors. Electric vehicles and their related infrastructure now account for fully 40% of energy transition investment in Canada. And it's CVMA members that are really at the forefront of this transition. Over the past 2 years, we've had some excellent news in Canada. Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis have announced investments of $13.5 billion, which will create over 6,000 direct jobs and tens of thousands throughout the auto supply chain. The majority of this investment is dedicated to EV assembly and the battery supply chain. So we recommend the following actions to realize the full economic benefits of clean technologies in the auto industry and to ensure that Canada achieves its climate objectives. Priority number one, we have to keep up and keep aligned with the United States. The Inflation Reduction Act is arguably the most significant development for Canada's auto sector since the passage of the CUSMA agreement. The U.S. is committing more than $370 billion to fight climate change. This includes massive new investments in EV manufacturing, sales, and related infrastructure. The federal government should move swiftly to identify and react to competitive gaps in our manufacturing sector that will be exacerbated by this act. Particular attention should be given to battery manufacturing, where the U.S. now has a significant advantage. And number two, we need to boost EV adoption in Canada. We need a comprehensive plan to help more Canadians make the switch to electric and achieve our climate goals. According to RBC's recent assessment of the investments required to achieve net zero by 2050, spending on EVs is going to need to grow from $4 billion right now annually to approximately $22 billion annually. Priority, of course, should be on building a comprehensive public charging network, investments in clean, affordable, and reliable electricity generation and grid infrastructure, and improvements to the Consumer Purchase Incentive Program, also known as IZEV, to make EVs affordable for all Canadians. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kingston. And last but not least, Ms. Natalie Giglio. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
It's Giglio.
Giglio. I should know that. I should know
that's
better.
Okay. I get it a lot.
Yeah, Giglio. Of course, I knew that. A Senior Associate Business Development at Carbon Upcycling Technologies. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Natalie Giglio, and I'm here representing Carbon Upcycling Technologies. And I'd like to thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of my company today. Carbon upcycling's technology is simple. We capture and utilize CO2 directly in a single-step, low-energy system that only uses two main inputs. The first input is an industrial byproduct or a natural mineral that are typically sent to landfill. And the second is CO2 directly from a point source of emissions. We combine the waste materials and the CO2 in our system to produce cement replacements that actually make concrete stronger. Our technology will enable Canada to build climate-resilient concrete infrastructure. Carbon Upcycling is a Canadian-founded, Calgary, Alberta-based company, and in Calgary, we operate a commercial facility. And earlier this year, the Honourable Chrystia Freeland visited us to see the progress we're making in deploying CCUS in Canada. Over the last 8 years, we have successfully scaled our technology 10 million times, and that scale-up was largely supported by $12 million in government funding, and now we've begun raising capital investment. As I discussed, our first input is an industrial byproduct or a natural mineral. And across Canada, there are abundant supplies of these materials that are simply underutilized. Carbon upcycling turns those materials into valuable cement replacements, so we can continue to use concrete without increasing emissions. Our second input is CO2. Canada has 15 operational cement plants, each emitting CO2. And carbon upcycling's technology directly captures and utilizes that CO2 from the cement plants before that CO2 even has a chance to enter the atmosphere. Our technology is being scaled in Canada today, and we're working with some of the most influential partners in that journey. We partnered with the City of Calgary to deploy low-carbon concrete sidewalks and are actively working with some of Canada's largest cement and concrete companies. In order to keep scaling this technology in Canada, we see 3 areas where we can better be supported. First, funding needs to enable technology to scale quickly. Companies and projects need to be granted funding now so that we can build our first commercial units before 2030. Second, reducing and removing regulatory barriers in order to foster innovation. This can be done by adjusting federal procurement language. And third, incentivizing CCUS so that it can be rapidly deployed and scaled. The investment tax credit for the CCUS has set a solid framework for supporting companies like ourselves, and we have submitted our recommendations on the ITC so that it can better support a more holistic CCUS ecosystem within Canada. So with that, I hope you continue to support and follow our journey as we're on track to becoming one of the most impactful carbon utilization companies of this decade. And if you are ever in Calgary, I would be more than happy to tour you at our facility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go now to our 2 rounds of questioning, starting with Mr. Seaback for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Brian, it was interesting to hear you mention the IRA. We've heard that at this committee several times during this study. What would you say would need to be done to compete with the IRA, specifically in the zero-emission vehicle space?
Thank you. The most significant component of the IRA as it relates to auto manufacturing and in particular zero-emission vehicle manufacturing is what's called the Advanced Manufacturing Tax Credit, Section 45X of the IRA. And what it does is it provides a $35 per kilowatt hour credit, refundable credit, to companies that build battery cells modules in the United States. This is a game changer. It's the most significant incentive we've seen in a very long time, and now Canada has to compete with not just municipal and state level governments, but now the federal government. And that tax credit alone is estimated at a cost of $30 billion US. So if we want to win battery investments, we've got to match that.
So is there any comparable or relatively comparable program that's currently being offered by the Canadian federal government?
No, there was it was in budget 2021. It was called a zero emission manufacturing tax credit that was introduced. However, it's very narrow. The timelines are narrow. It's not refundable. The calculation of eligible income is very precise, so it's not comparable. It had potential, and it got a lot of attention when it was announced, but the definitions are too narrow, and it won't become even close to what the U.S. is offering.
And would you hazard a guess on what will happen if the federal government in Canada doesn't come up with similar incentives with respect to the battery sector?
If we don't match what the U.S. has done, I think it's safe to conclude that it's highly unlikely we will see significant battery investments made in Canada going forward.
I just want to turn quickly to, you have a dashboard that your organization has put up with respect to incentive gap and charging gap with respect to the Road to 2035 zero-emission vehicle mandate. We had a gentleman here at committee, it might have been last week or the week before, Monsieur Rochette, and he suggested, I brought up your charging gap, which if I look at the dashboard, it says right now it's 1,660,338 is the gap in Canada, and the gap is not closing quickly. He said, basically, that's crazy. What would you say about that?
There are differing estimates for what is required in terms of public charging infrastructure. Our assessment is based off what leading jurisdictions in the world are doing and what ratio they're using. And typically the ratio that's determined is how many EVs on the road per public charger do you need? And what we see when we look at California, Germany, the European Union, the ratio they use is 10 to 1. In Canada, the federal government's most recent assessment put out by NRCan is suggesting we need 43 EVs on the road per public port. I don't understand why we've chosen such an unambitious target. I think that's extremely concerning if we're going to help every Canadian make the switch. And so while you can debate which ratio is the best, I know that we are not currently on track of the 34,000 chargers that the government has provided funding for. Only 2,500 are operational. And the government's own study admits that we need to get to over 700,000 by 2050 to support an electrified fleet. So I don't see a path from 2,500 to 700,000, and I would argue that 700,000 is far too few.
So what you're saying is Europe is using the standard of 10 per charged vehicle, but somehow the government of Canada is saying the correct number is 43, more than 4 times higher.
That's correct. The European figure is every 10 EVs on the road, 1 public port. In Canada, the recent study says we need 43 EVs per port. Yeah.
How much time do I have, Ms. Chair?
You have less than 2 minutes.
Oh, good. I now want to turn to the incentive gap part of your chart. We know that there is a zero-emission vehicle mandate coming, 2035. You can no longer purchase an internal combustion engine. The adoption right now is somewhere around 5-6% of new vehicles are EVs. What would you say is the main impediment and reason why we're nowhere close to 100%?
Affordability is the number one impediment. Survey after survey from both industry and government confirm that that's the biggest barrier. Recent data that we've just had a look at from J.D. Power that looks at transaction prices shows that there's a $20,000 gap in the most popular segment, which is the compact SUV segment, between EV and ICE. Canada's incentive is $5,000, and in our most popular province, Ontario, there is no incentive. So asking a middle-class family to increase their vehicle budget by $20,000, highly, highly unlikely in this current economic environment. So we need a bigger incentive first and foremost.
And would you say the lack of charging infrastructure is also a problem right now as well?
Number one is affordability and price. Number two is charging. Those are the 2 big barriers that consistently come up.
Great. Those are my questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Seaback. Ms. Thompson.
Thank you. If I pronounce your name correctly, Giglio? Thank you. If I could begin with you. Your company is doing some truly innovative work in utilizing circular economy principles to both reduce greenhouse gas emissions and produce better products. Would you please discuss how putting a price on greenhouse gas emissions is essential for clean technologies to be able to compete on a clear playing field?
Yeah, I think for our company specifically, we're looking at making our technology economically available without the need for a price on greenhouse gas emissions. Carbon credits and that pricing schemes are an additional benefit to our technology specifically, but that's unique to our business model. For the rest of our industry and for the rest of the technologies that we need to bring to market, it's extremely important, and it's that factor itself is going to be what takes our partners, the big cement companies, the big heavy emitters, that's going to be what drives them to invest in companies like us faster if they have this price chasing them down to invest and bring infrastructure online to decarbonize their systems.
Thank you. And Mr. Kingston, if I could now move to you. In what ways could Canada's current regulatory and policy framework facilitate or hinder the realization of the country's potential to the battery supply chain?
Sure, thank you. So the most important thing for the Canadian economy and the auto supply chain is our integration with the United States. That's really what's underpinned so many of the investments that have been made here. Over 90% of the vehicles that we build end up in the United States. So ensuring that we continue to align our regulations with the U.S. from a manufacturing perspective, from a safety perspective is key. One big element of this is the fact that we have aligned tailpipe regulations aligned with the EPA. That's been pivotal to increasing efficiency of vehicles and encouraging this integrated market. So I'd say that should be our biggest priority, is keep an eye to the U.S. and keep aligned.
Thank you. And sort of the same thread, what changes would you make to federal policies and support programs to ensure that Canada realizes its EV batteries supply chain potential?
So first and foremost is a response to the Inflation Reduction Act. We need to move quickly, understand those competitive gaps. We don't have the fiscal firepower to match a US $30 billion tax credit, but we do have some unique advantages in the supply chain, and critical minerals being a great example. So where we do have those competitive advantages, we have to match what the US is providing companies to make sure that investment still flows to Canada.
Thank you. And again, continuing on, are there lessons from Canada's successes to date in the EV battery sector that can be applied to other tech sectors? And if so, if you could discuss that.
Yeah, I think the big lesson, particularly over the past 2 years, and the success that Canada has had in attracting some investment into EV manufacturing, a lot of it is because of programs like the Strategic Innovation Fund and the Net Zero Accelerator that was attached to that. Companies took note when the government announced major incentive programs that were dedicated towards zero emission or net zero technologies. So I think more of that and applied to other sectors is really important. Companies are looking to invest right now, and if governments are out explaining the programs they have on offer, it does get attention.
I still have time? Oh, good. So just want to actually go back to a point that came forward last week with another witness, and it aligned with that the realities of how quickly the technology is expanding and shifting with the investment in infrastructure. If you could speak to that in terms of projecting 5-10 years down the road when we know the technologies around EVs are so rapidly shifting.
Sorry, in terms of charging infrastructure?
Yes.
Yes, there's no doubt that the technology is shifting rapidly. I mean, in total right now, global automakers are investing about $550 billion US into this technology through 2030. And as a result, this is why one of the big asks that we've had of government recently is to engage more with automakers on charging infrastructure, because we're bringing new vehicles into the market with new technologies at a very rapid pace, some which have much larger batteries that require different paces and speeds of charging. So there's a lot happening, and it does make it difficult to forecast out what the technology will look like and how much of it we need. But what we do know is that more and more EVs are coming to market, and Canadians are going to need more infrastructure to make that accessible for them.
Thank you. And if I could move to Dr. McPherson. Again, in our one of our meetings last week with other witnesses, they commented on the funding programs needed to support clean technologies and really recommended that they be better harmonized to allow for faster deployment of clean tech. Do you agree with this? And I'd really appreciate your comments on that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the deployment of especially renewables right now, but also transmission infrastructure and EV charging and basically the technologies that we have on deck now, getting those in the ground is really I think is hugely important and a huge challenge. I mean, we've really only got 13 years between now and 2035. There's obviously a lot of research and development that can go into improving technologies, but at this moment in time, I think deployment and policies and funding for really accelerated deployment needs to be a top priority.
Okay, sorry, we'll have to move on.
Thank you.
Okay, to Madame Posey for 6 minutes.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to open a bracket here. The problems that we're experiencing with the headsets, I know we're going to talk about the discussion, we're going to talk about hybrid parliament, but I think people need to talk about it because my witness is going to come next week, but I'll have half as much time to ask him questions. So I wanted to make that point first. Now, if we go back to renewable resources, Ms. Giglio, you finished your speech by saying that tax credits for carbon capture need a framework. This is part of our recommendations to better support these ecosystems holistically. I've heard of this concept in another file of carbon capture, utilization, and storage, where we use CO2 differently. And it's to get stores underground. What you're doing seems different. Do your installations have lower outputs of greenhouse gases than other groups that do not have capture and storage of carbon?
So carbon upcycling is focused on turning CO2 into value-added products. We don't store CO2 underground or in the oceans. We put it into materials that can be used in transportation networks, in our sidewalks, in the infrastructure in our buildings, wherever concrete is used. So that's where our company is focused. There is room for storage underground, but I think the real change in Canada's ability to be a leader is helping support technologies who are taking CO2 and turning it into valuable products. So that's what we do.
En produit pour le ciment. Vous avez implanté.
You've used energy efficient technology in your own facilities?
So our technology doesn't use any added heat or water or fossil fuels to produce and capture the CO2. We take it directly from a cement kiln, capture it into that industrial byproduct or natural mineral, and then that material permanently holds onto the CO2 and puts it into concrete. And so we ourselves don't generate any emissions. We capture it into the material.
Est-ce que vous connaissez?
Have you heard of Eco Concrete? It's a business that produces green concrete without any carbon capture.
Est-ce que vous savez si elle mise sur la même technologie?
Do you know if it uses the same technology?
I have not heard of eco-concrete, but there's multiple angles in the concrete sector. There's people who make the concrete blocks, jersey barriers, the precast formed concrete, and then there's folks who make what goes into sidewalks, the wet concrete that comes out of the trucks. There's technologies to utilize carbon in both sides.
Okay, merci.
Great, thank you very much. What do you think the government can do to create a structure that the federal government would create for its procurement policy? You talked about procurement in your presentation. So what can we do or recommend to the government to do?
What I would suggest is changing the specification language to be about performance, not a prescriptive mix where you say you need to have this many kilograms of cement, this many kilograms of aggregate and sand. We want it to be performance-based, to say use whatever ingredients you need to make this strength of concrete. And that's going to be what allows innovations like ourselves to be included in procurement and infrastructure that the government funds.
OK, je reviendrai avec.
A researcher and academic talked to us about energy efficient buildings. She talked about the massive proportions of our budget that the government has invested in hydrocarbons since the 70s, and that we need to reverse this proportion. Without thinking of clean energy technologies counted 400 technologies, and this researcher said that these technologies are available to be marketed now, and we can launch them immediately with appropriate help. So if you were a decider, if you had to choose a clean technology that should be prioritized, which one would you choose?
That's a big question.
Grosse question.
Yeah, I would say carbon utilization as an entire industry where you take that CO2 and turn it into value-added products. You know, it can go into concrete, it can go into fertilizers, it can go into the chemicals industry, it can go beyond just infrastructure. And I think there's a lot of companies out there who have great ideas who need the platform to bring CO2 into those valuable products.
Monsieur le Président, est-ce que...
Mr. Chair? 40 seconds. Okay. So I'll just make another comment then. If we changed how we fund energy and funded renewable energy, I think that the expenses could increase 100%. Of course, I'm comparing to what we're spending on fossil fuels.
Merci beaucoup. Madame. À vous la parole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my first question is to Dr. McPherson. The importance of our electricity grids has been something we've heard from a number of witnesses. And we need to move towards electrification to reduce our emissions. You've identified interprovincial grid connections as a key piece of this. And you spoke a little bit about the role the federal government can play. The Inflation Reduction Act has been mentioned a number of times today, and the US is investing billions in renewables, in grid infrastructure, in storage. In some ways, it feels like Canada's positioned really well with a kind of abundant non-emitting sources, albeit in different regions. But it feels like we're falling behind, and it feels like grid connections aren't moving forward as quickly as we'd like to see them. Can you talk a little bit more about what you think federal leadership would look like, both in terms of the scale of funding and also working with the provinces and with Indigenous governments?
Yeah, I think that that's exactly right, that we're sort of positioned really well in a lot of ways. We do have a lot of our provinces which are already largely decarbonized. And so in some ways we're, ahead of other jurisdictions that are still working on decarbonizing their power systems. At the same time, we obviously have provinces that are still depending on a lot of fossil energy or fossil sources for electricity. So I think what we really need to be at this point is strategic about using the assets that we have already to help decarbonize the provinces, the power systems in the provinces that really need to get there. And coming back to Brian's point on EVs and some of the other conversations that we've been having around electrification really only works when our power system is decarbonized. There's not a lot of carbon benefits or decarbonization benefits from driving an EV charged on a power system that is really fossil intensive. But at the same time, a lot of those provinces that have fossil intensive grids have really excellent wind resources. So again, we're kind of lucky in that way, but it's a question of getting those grids off of fossil fuels first, which I think means a lot of wind deployment, other technologies too, but a lot of wind deployment. And the variability of operating that grid really can be helped by transmission linkages with the other provinces. So I think federal leadership in that space really looks like helping provinces talk to one another to really figure out how to have that, different rate structures between different provinces. Some are vertically integrated and others are open markets. And so there's a lot of discussions that need to happen to help get provinces to do that interprovincial transmission connection. And I think that the federal government could play a role in helping to have those conversations and bring the provinces together to do that.
And currently the rate of growth for renewables in Canada is among the lowest in the G20. It seems like you're saying that regardless of the energy mix, as we move forward, our electrical grids are going to be a key part of reaching our targets. Do you have a sense of the kind of scale of investment that you'd like to see from the federal government in order to support both our move towards renewables, wind power and others, and this critical piece of building out our transmission lines and interprovincial grid connections?
Yeah, so what we're sort of seeing is, the kind of the highest rate of renewable deployment that we've seen in Canada is about 10 gigawatts. That happened between about 2011 and 2015. That was sort of our record for wind and solar deployments. And what we're going to see on average, what we're going to have to see on average moving forward is about 50 gigawatts. So about a 5-fold increase in addition to previous deployment levels. The good news is that a lot that wind and to a less extent solar, but wind in particular is already competitive, and market forces are, private investment is already doing a lot of the investment in that. So I think signaling as far as deployment of wind goes, the price on carbon really helps to make the wind more competitive. But I think de-risking those investments and making the permitting processes for those investments, in particular in wind, is really helpful. But I think that what we're going to see as soon as those provinces get to, if we look at other jurisdictions, 30 or 40% penetration of wind on their systems, they're going to start running into operational issues around variability. And that's really where that transmission interconnection piece comes into play. And the reason I'm pushing more on the transmission piece right now is because I think we're seeing that is going to be an issue on the horizon. And that process of building interprovincial transmission is it's so time consuming, especially if we want to do it properly, right? Like if we want to do it in collaborations with Indigenous communities, and it's a lengthy process, and so that's why we really have to start on that now.
Thanks so much. And Mr. Chair, how long
do I have? Time is essentially
up.
It's 10 seconds for a comment. Or...
Well, it just seems like those interprovincial connections are just critical to reducing Canada's emissions and keeping global temperature rise below 1.5. So thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Carey, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start with Mr. Kingston. Coming from Oshawa, the auto industry is hugely important for my community, and there was a disappointment with some witnesses last week where we had some great Canadian innovation, but they basically have gone south of the border because there's no programs to support their particular companies here in Canada. I wanted to get back to this whole idea of charging stations, and you mentioned that you're using the best estimates that are out with the world leaders, about 4 million charging stations we would need. That doesn't take into account that we're actually pretty cold here. And I've driven electric vehicles before. Sometimes in this time of year it starts to go down, so it may even be more. But even with those numbers, I'm estimating, and I'm not the greatest at math, but 5 or 6 years we've been doing this, we only need 3,997,500 more charging stations to meet our goals. And I'm just wondering, are there any government plans that you have seen that will allow us to meet those goals in the time frame that the government actually set for industry?
As it stands right now, no. The government's current plan is to build 84,500 chargers by 2027, and there's only 2,500 that are operational. At the current rate of build and deployment, it seems highly unlikely to me that we'll get to that 84,000 target by 2027. And then if you consider a fully electrified fleet, if we hit those targets, 100% by 2035, that's nearly 39 million vehicles on the road by 2050. That's where you're going to require, if you use the 10-to-1 ratio, 4 million public chargers. And that doesn't even include the estimate for multi-unit residential chargers, which are critically important to this. People that live in apartments and condo towers will need to be able to charge at home. And the government's own assessment is estimating 5.6 million MURB ports. And I am not aware of any plans to build that out. And that's going to be hugely expensive. It's possible, but it's a big lift.
Well, that's disappointing to hear. Like I said, we had some bad news last week. But listen, you guys are numbers guys. How much would 4 million charging stations cost at today's estimates?
I wish I could give you a good figure for that. I don't have one. What I can give you is the estimate that NRCan has put forward to build the public charging network that it thinks we need, which I would argue is a little bit too small, but they're estimating that will cost $20 billion over the next 3 decades to build that number of public chargers. My estimate is 4 times that, so very back of the envelope math here, but we're talking about $80 billion.
Yeah, I'm thinking we might need a few more, so I'd go 5 times. So I'm thinking maybe $100 billion for that. Just wondered who's going to pay for that with no plan. We talked a little bit about the grid, okay, and we've heard witnesses talk to us a little bit about the grid. I live in Oshawa, Ontario. There's some challenges with the grid. We heard some communities you can plug in 10 of these electric cars and it'll cause a brownout. So any idea what it would cost to upgrade our grid? Let's just look at Ontario. Have you guys got any numbers for us? Because we need to plan these things as responsible government.
Unfortunately, we don't, and this has been something that we have been asking for. All of the local distribution companies are developing plans to accommodate more electrification. But as far as we're aware, nobody has pulled together a macro estimate, be it just for Ontario or for the broader Canadian economy. What will you require in every single jurisdiction to accommodate more vehicles? So it's safe to say that it's going to be in the billions, but there's no transparency or clarity on what that looks like and who's planning for that build out to accommodate a higher uptake of EVs. And that's critical. We can build all the public charging ports we want, but if we don't have the transmission lines and the generation capacity, we'll be in a difficult position.
Yeah, that I can see that. I was just wondering, we had some ideas from witnesses, which I thought were good ideas, and one of them was to the government adopt a procurement process that would support different industries. Like, do you know of a government plan, a federal government plan right now that would actually assist the industry? In other words, does the federal government buy a lot of electric cars right now, and does it, if they don't, does it have something to do, maybe there's not enough charging stations to plug these things in to get the work done?
10 seconds, Mr. Kingston.
Yeah, very quickly, we've been asking the government to be a leader in this and to procure more electric vehicles if they want the Canadian public to follow suit. So we'd like to see more.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mr. Duguid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to give a significant amount of my time to Mr. Longfield, as he has a very timely question to ask. But my one question to Ms. Gilio. Gilio.
We're getting closer.
Okay, all right. And I am going to be coming to see carbon upcycling
I would love
very
that.
soon, if you will have me. I'll be in Calgary in the not-too-distant future, and I'll talk to you about that. But back to the issue of procurement. Government of Canada is the largest owner of buildings in the country. They're the largest procurer of cement, the last time I checked. Yeah. I wonder if you can amplify on some of the comments you made earlier in terms of, have you done any modeling on, just the kind of what difference it would make to industries like yours if the government had a procurement policy that significantly supported your sector and related sectors?
Yeah, I think I'll start. So when I look forward and when technologies like carbon upcyclings are at scale, specific to the cement industry in this case, because we're going to talk about concrete procurement, if carbon upcycling's technology was implemented at full scale across the cement plants, we could essentially cut the emissions from the cement and concrete industry in half. So there's significant benefit to supporting technologies like ours. And then on the flip side, so once it's at scale or well at scaling, on the procurement angle, when we talk about low carbon infrastructure, it's a very broad statement. To say a low carbon building, it could be LED lights, it can be, better windows. There's a large breadth of what you can deploy. When I think about the concrete and that on the procurement side of things, you need to make sure that it talks about that performance basis, that you're not limiting yourself to specific specifications or quantities of material. So I think that's going to be a big part of it, but it's part of a broader strategy.
Great. Mr. Longfield.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for sharing some time. And Mr. Kingston, I love the auto industry and the developments that are happening. Thank you for the work that you've done with us on our auto caucus. I want to bring up a couple of questions or comments about some of your members, which are very positive. I'm very excited to see what's going on in the EV market in Canada. One is with the investment in Windsor with Stellantis and LG doing an EV plant, $5 billion investment, up and running for 2025, 2,500 jobs for Windsor. Incredible news for Windsor. There was testimony earlier today to say that we wouldn't be doing EV in Canada. Could you square that circle for me, please?
Yeah, Thank you, and thank you for all of your support of Auto Caucus and the industry. So over the past 2 years, $13.5 billion in new investment in Canada, including a $5 billion investment for a battery plant, as well as converting Windsor Assembly to manufacture an electric vehicle. Same thing in Brampton. So these are massive investments, and the government full credit for everything that was done with respect to the Build Back Better Act. There was, you'll recall, a very concerning issue with respect to North American Assembly. So now Canadian-built vehicles will be eligible for the U.S. EV incentive, which is critical. The big question now is on a go-forward basis, given the scale of the IRA, will companies invest in Canada when they have an incentive so large in the United States?
Right. Given the integrated supply chain, when looking at General Motors, another one of your members in Bécancour, Quebec, is doing the battery chemical plant that will then supply other General Motors plants for creating the batteries. But then they come back to the GM lines in Oshawa and in Ingersoll. And both Oshawa and Ingersoll are committed to EV production, and pickup trucks in Oshawa, which is, I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. I can't wait to see those come off the line. In fact, I've got my Colorado just sitting in the driveway. Anyway, that's a whole other story. So the integrated nature of Canada supplying minerals and then doing chemical processing and then having the batteries come back for value add in Canada with General Motors. Great opportunity.
Huge opportunity, and I think the positive element of the Inflation Reduction Act is the United States has put very specific guardrails and restrictions around which vehicles will qualify for incentives, and a lot of that now hinges on sourcing critical minerals from North America or a free trade partner.
Which is us.
Canada has, we're a trade partner, obviously, but we also have endowments of critical minerals that the U.S. doesn't have. And so I think we've got a very unique opportunity in some niche areas to be part of that supply chain.
Great. And Ford Oakville is, just to slide it into the, Ford Oakville is also doing EVs, so not to leave Ford Oakville.
Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair.
Alors, on passe maintenant à Madame Posé.
We are now moving to Madame Posé for 2 minutes. My question is to Ms. McPherson. You talked about the different levels of government. There are energy issues and environmental issues that are important to all levels of government, municipal, provincial, and federal. Aligning public policy is essential. But beyond that, according to you, how can we do this tangibly? How can we make sure that there is collaboration between the various levels of government?
Great. Yeah, thank you for that question. I think, one of the big things, as I was saying, that I think that the federal government can do is help convene a conversation. And so one of the tangible things actually that NRCan has already done is provide $5 million to start a energy modeling hub. And the hub basically, the idea of the hub is basically to bring together modelers and decision makers, and so that is an example, a tangible example of a way in which we can get different types of stakeholders, which could include different levels of government, at the same table, having a conversation, and really using modeling and the insights from modeling to evaluate different pathways, to explore the barriers in those pathways and the opportunities in those pathways, and to try to have a more consistent and evidence-based conversation. So that's sort of one example that that is actually to some extent already happening, in the sense that we've launched this energy modeling hub and we've launched this initiative. And at this point, we really are looking for people to such as yourselves to come in.
I was just going to, I wanted to ask how long it would take to launch it, because we're in a climate crisis and you're saying it's already underway, so that's good news. Again, Ms. McPherson, how much hope do you have on the present government's approach, on its programs to reduce CO2 and its programs on clean technology?
I think that, the price on carbon is a great first step, but I think to get to our climate goals, we really do need a lot more. And especially we need a lot more when it comes to that sort of strategic thinking about how to decarbonize our grids and then how to electrify
Thank
as
you.
much and as quickly as possible.
Thanks very much. Ms. Collins for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I was really excited to see the NRCan 5 million for the Energy Modeling Hub, and really great to see the Institute for Integrated Energy Systems at the University of Victoria as a partner. And Mr. Carey and Mr. Kingston were talking a little bit about the gap in knowledge around what that build out of grid infrastructure is going to look like. Can you talk about the role of the Energy Modeling Hub and the work it's doing on decarbonizing energy systems in Canada, and kind of what would you like to see, or how would you want the government to interact with and use what you're producing going forward?
Yeah, so I think there's two major gaps that I see. First is improving our modeling capability in general, so that we can explore deep decarbonization. And one of the things I think that's happening, especially with electrification, is that our energy systems are becoming a lot more intertwined with one another. So even this conversation about EVs, that's really a linking of the transport system and the power system, which have historically been distinct. And that introduces a lot of complexity in terms of navigating pathways and understanding the implications of, power system prices on EV charging and vice versa. It's just, there's a lot of complexity there. So we need more modeling capability that is to be able to explore that. And that really ties to the second thing, which is that it's becoming more interdependent. So we need more voices in the room. We need more stakeholders. We can't be really sitting in our silos anymore of, okay, I'm a power systems engineer and I'm just looking at the power system. You're a transportation engineer, or, you're thinking about Indigenous rights. Like, we actually need all of those voices in the same room at the same time. And then we need to be able to take those insights and give them to the decision makers who can actually make use of them, who are actually designing the policies and turning those things into action. So I think that's been our biggest gap in Canada, is that sort of that institutional, that we don't have that linkage there, in the way that there's institutions in the States and in Europe that do have institutions that really link modelers to decision makers, and it can be quite an effective thing. So I think that's been one of our big gaps.
Thanks so
10
much.
seconds.
Thank you so much to all of the witnesses. Thanks.
In parentheses, may yield to Mr. Seaback.
You'll go first. I'm going to share my time with Mr. Carey.
Go ahead.
How much time do I have?
5 minutes.
Dr. McPherson, I read a report by RBC on Path to Net Zero. They talk about it's a $2 trillion path. One of the things they outline is the key need is to double electricity output. Which of course is just going to be generation, but then of course there's going to be transmission, which, as you I think have talked about today, will often involve going across provincial boundaries. This is a massive undertaking to double the electricity capacity of the country, and I think it requires federal leadership in order to do that. Have you seen any evidence of federal leadership in doubling the electricity capacity and also dealing with the transmission of that capacity across the country?
So I completely agree. I think it's a huge undertaking, and that twofold number is a number that's coming out of a lot of different studies, including our own work, and it could actually be more than that. I think there's a huge opportunity for federal leadership, and again, especially when it comes to those interprovincial lines. As far as federal leadership so far, I mean, I guess there was the funding of the Energy Modeling Hub, but I think we could see a lot more leadership, especially when it comes to those interprovincial ties. And so, some of our work looking at that has been sort of a 3 to 5-fold increase in interprovincial transmission lines. This is a huge, there's just a lot of negotiations that have to happen to make that work. And I think that there's a role for the federal government in doing that.
My time now to Mr. Carey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seaback. Again, I kind of want to go a little more with the auto industry, and when you're looking at the mining and supply chains, as my colleague said, here in Canada we have the rare earth minerals. We have the capability in this country to take it out of the ground, turn it into a battery, or press it, turn it into a piece of steel. And all those value-added jobs can be kept here if we have the right policies. And like I said last week, we're hearing about companies leaving. We want to keep them here. There's 31 critical minerals that have been recognized as important for building these batteries. And with the automotive industry building electric cars now, do you know any Canadian mines where they're sourcing critical minerals today to supply those batteries in North American plants? Are they sourcing it from Canada yet?
I'm aware that nickel is being sourced from Canada in terms of the rest of the minerals on that list. I think most of it is still sort of to come. But
yeah, I think cobalt too. I think
cobalt.
We've got
Yes, that's
cobalt.
right. First cobalt.
So out of the 31 essential critical minerals, we're sourcing about 2 of them. I think there's some new ideas for mines, and they need to go through the environmental assessment. They need to get up and running. Any idea how many years it takes to get a mine up and running? Especially a critical mineral mine like lithium, where there can be some toxic chemicals released. Any idea how long that's going to take in Canada?
My understanding is it's about 8 to 10 years for the regulatory approval process.
It is. Okay, so we have 2 minerals that are getting sources and maybe one in another 10 or 12 years. Also interested in R&D. Oshawa, we used to have the engineering center. We did a lot of R&D. We invested as a government in the Automotive Center of Excellence. Just wondering for incentives for electrification, how does Canada compare to our largest trading partner and actually Mexico as far as that competitive piece of it? For a company to do the R&D here, is there equal incentives to get that done here in Canada, or are we still lagging behind?
What we tend to see in the auto industry is that when you have a major investment in an actual assembly facility or an engine facility, then research and development comes along with that. So a good example is the recent Stellantis LG investment, battery plant, and then with that you're going to see a research facility attached with a number of jobs, usually very highly skilled jobs associated with it. So we've been making the case that you need to attract that anchor investment, the EV assembly, the battery plant, and then the R&D will come with it. And right now, given some of the provisions in the IRA, I think it's become more challenging. But I think if we focus on those anchor facilities, we'll see the R&D come along with it.
I agree with you. We have to have the bricks and mortars here. But we don't have any R&D announcements yet. One quick question with the IRA. I could see that as a subsidy of sort. Could that be challenged with the WTO? Should the government be looking into that as uncompetitive, advantage to the United States because of a government policy? Should we be challenging that under the WTO, do you think?
Kind of a yes and no answer because we're out of time.
No.
Okay, good.
Given the integration of our industry.
So we'll go to Ms. Taylor-Roy, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. It's been a very interesting conversation, and I think one thing that has become clear is the complexity of modeling what our energy needs are going to be, in particular for charging stations. I have a constituent who is currently working in a company, Purus Power, that is involved in kinetic energy, and vehicles will be recharging themselves as they drive. And I think, as you've commented, Mr. Kingston, the technology is changing so rapidly. I'm almost glad that we haven't built out all these stations that may not be able to serve us in the future. So one of the questions I had for you, Ms. McPherson, is do you think, given that this is such a multivariable analysis trying to forecast into the future, and our assumptions are constantly changing with the quick pace of development in clean tech, that we can really accurately forecast right now what we're going to need in the future for charging stations?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think there's sort of 2 parts to that question. On the one hand, I think we have to be doing everything that we can, basically as quickly as we can, because these timelines are really tight. But when we're doing our modeling, what's really interesting is there are some pathways that are quite robust, meaning that as we change our assumptions or different ways in which the future could pan out, our results are quite robust against those. And then there's other pathways that are less robust, meaning that if we tweak an input assumption one way or another, we get an entirely different pathway or an entirely different analysis. So I think that version of sensitivity analysis is really important. And again, this comes back to the modeling work. So, getting more into the technical weeds here, but developing machine learning models that really help us explore which of those pathways and which of those decisions are robust and which of those decisions are less robust. And
it's very complex. And I think the other thing I was wondering about was the comparison between the numbers that Canada is using and Europe, for example. The 10 versus 43 number for charging stations. How would the impact of at-home charging stations and the fact that Canadians, we have our own houses, and many people, like myself, have 2 charging stations in my garage right now, and even the technology that's going to allow us to put energy back into the grid from cars off-peak. So how is all that factored into those numbers, and do you believe that Canada needs the same number as Europe because of that additional private homes we have in Canada, the percentage?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. I mean, the first thing, it really, really, really depends. One of the things, talking about robustness, one of the things that really changes the answer to a lot of these questions is when and where charging is happening, right? So if everybody comes home at 6 o'clock and plugs their electric vehicle in to a neighborhood with a distribution system that has not been upgraded, it doesn't work. But if we have smart charging, right? Like if different people are charging at different times of the day, taking advantage of high wind periods of the day, for example, it's a totally different story. So to what extent are we going to have rates and policies that incentivize people to charge during optimal times of the day? That's part of it. And then sort of the earlier part of the conversation, these distribution systems, and they really vary across the country in terms of how much additional capacity they have on them. And unfortunately, that's data, at least from a research perspective, and Brian was sort of alluding to this as well, that's really hard to get our hands on. So it's a little bit, that's a little bit of a trickier thing to actually know what's going on those distribution systems. And then I think it also really depends on the policies for charging, when and where people are charging.
Thank you. Do I have any time left? Okay, great. And the other thing I was going to ask about was regulation and government incentives, because we were talking about de-risking investments in clean tech and looking at that. And I know there's a lot of talk about, governments shouldn't have regulations. All we need is to put money into the industry and everything will be fine. But when it comes to de-risking investments, regulations that actually require long-term contracts, for example, for some of our alternate power producers, how helpful do you think that would be in actually requiring that utilities purchase power from some of these alternative sources and have those long-term contracts?
Briefly, please, Dr. McPherson.
Yeah, I think de-risking those incentive or investments is really important. I think especially wind is fairly competitive, but uncertainty in what regulations are going to look like can really put a damper on things.
Thank you so much. What a fascinating discussion. We really appreciated the panel's participation. We'll take a small break and connect with the second panel. We only have about 50 minutes. I'll have to adjust the time each questioner has. I'll do the math while we hear from our witnesses for 3 minutes each. We have Dr. Donald Smith, whom I've met recently, I think it was last spring. Nice to see you. Distinguished James McGill Professor. So why don't you start, Dr. Smith, for 3 minutes.
Sure. Okay. Can you hear me or just
Yeah, you have to press
that button? Is it okay now? Okay, sure. Okay, first I'd just like to thank the committee for inviting me here. It does seem like a very interesting process. In terms of general background for where I am, agriculture can help manage some large environmental challenges such as greenhouse gas levels and associated climate change because it covers quite a slice of the Earth's total terrestrial surface area. Atmospheric CO2 can be incorporated into food crop residual biomass, this is stems, leaves, roots, things like that, or biomass crops, where it all goes into the soils, and that's the point. These things can be added into the soils. They improve soil quality and subsequent crop productivity, and there's a bit of a feed forward there in terms of removing CO2 from the atmosphere. The biomass can also be used for biofuel production. I'm guessing a lot of you know this, but the nice thing about this from my perspective is that when you burn biofuel material, it releases CO2 into the atmosphere that came out of the atmosphere only a year or two before, whereas when you burn fossil fuels, the CO2 that's released came out of the atmosphere millions to hundreds of millions of years before. So, and the system is equilibrated to its absence. In terms of broader efforts in research, Dr. Xiaoming Zhou and I, both from McGill University's Faculty of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, administer the Biomass Canada Cluster. This is BMC, as we call it, funded through AAFC. BMC conducts work on recycling crops and other waste biomass as heat sources to make crop production more sustainable, including at high latitudes. There's also production of things like high-value bioproducts. There's a novel bioadhesive, which has now been patented and is being scaled up for production. There's research on biochar, and the really nice thing about biochar is that when you add standard biomass to soils, the material is in there on the average sort of from years to decades. When you add biochar, that carbon that's in that you've added to the soil is there from centuries to millennia. So the carbon goes in, it's there, it's out of the atmosphere for a long time. Finally, there's work on making plant biomass supply chains maximally efficient. In terms of my own research, my lab works on microbial technologies that enhance crop yield and resilience to stressful conditions such as those associated with climate change. And this is through the effects of, at least in some cases, signal compounds they produce. And we actually discovered a number of these. They produce and they regulate plant metabolism and even gene expression at very low concentrations. So they're kind of like hormones. And several of these have been commercialized. One of them has been with Novozymes and Bayer for a few years. And it has been earning over half the royalties from all the technologies at McGill University, indicating, I would argue, that it's being widely distributed and it is having an impact. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. We'll go now to Ian Thompson from Advanced Biofuels Canada for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee today. My name is Ian Thompson. I'm the president of Advanced Biofuels Canada. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking with you today from the traditional and unceded territory of the Squamish First Nation. Our trade association members include global biofuel producers and technology developers with over 23 billion liters of global advanced biofuel capacity. Time is brief, so I'll speak directly to the status of clean energy investments in Canada. You've heard this from previous witnesses this morning, but on August the 16th, the U.S. administration signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, $369 billion U.S. in clean energy provisions. The U.S. has clearly thrown down the gauntlet in the race to capture economic advantage in the global manufacture of clean fuels. IRA's tax credits and funding programs create material challenges to the competitiveness of clean fuel capital investments and the production and use of clean fuels in Canada. IRA has cross-cutting implications for future clean energy production. It will drive clean energy investment to low-carbon electricity, hydrogen, and clean fuels to the U.S. Without immediate and focused effort to create balanced investment conditions in Canada, our clean energy projects are imperiled. Our recommendations, which we'll submit in a more detailed document to the committee, focus on new measures necessary to mirror U.S. actions. One, establish a refundable low-carbon fuel production tax credit in the Income Tax Act to mirror the IRA Clean Fuel Production Credit, which comes into force on January 1st of 2025. Second, amend the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act to fully exempt low-carbon intensity fuels from the fuel charge. The exemption should require registration and compliance under the clean fuel regulations. Three, revise the proposed federal carbon capture, utilization, and storage tax credit by converting the credit design to a production tax credit that mirrors the new IRA 45Q scope and credit rates. Fourth and lastly, amend the newly established zero emission technology manufacturing federal income tax rate cut to apply to all low carbon intensity fuel manufacturing registered under the CFS. In closing, I would simply say the U.S. has taken action and putting Canada at a real crossroads with respect to its clean energy future. Generational clean energy capital investments are being drawn to the U.S. market under the IRA framework. Without immediate action to restore balance in North-South clean energy trade, Canada will forego the most of the economic benefits of the low-carbon economy, and our reliance on imported clean energy projects, such as clean liquid fuels and low-carbon hydrogen, will be increased. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. We'll go to Mr. Robert Syke, founder and chief executive officer of AG Visor Pro, Inc. For 3 minutes, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'm a professional agrologist and a certified agriculture consultant. In 2006, I was recognized by Alberta as a distinguished agrologist, 2014 Canadian Agri-Marketer of the Year, and 21 as one of Canada's top 50 most influential agriculture leaders. Currently, I'm CEO of AgVisor Pro, a connectivity platform for agriculture. In 2007, I founded arguably one of the first carbon credit trading companies in Canada. To date, we've traded over $50 million of offsets in agriculture. In 2019, on January 23rd, I presented this to all of the federal and deputy ministers of agriculture in the country of Canada. These numbers come from the NIR and the IPCC, and according to these numbers, all greenhouse gases from agriculture are emitting about 60 million metric tons, the smallest being fertilizer. From that is acknowledged that 11 million metric tons of carbon dioxide is sequestered or pulled out of the atmosphere into the soil. What is not accounted for is the full balance assessment of the 79 million metric tons of carbon dioxide being stored in the grain from the 95 million metric tons of produce that farmers grow. Farmers capture 132% of their total CO2e emitted, and when you take soil into account, that's 150%. This grain is being shipped internationally, meaning that Canada's crop farmers are 30 million metric tons CO2e to the positive. We take into account cow burps in the national inventory. It's recognized the carbon stored in soils, and we recognize the carbon stored in forestry. So we should be thinking about the carbon that's stored in grain. And we do that, we come up positive. But today the focus is on fertilizer. It's recognized that Canada produces about 1.6% of the global emissions. Agriculture is about 10% of Canada's global emissions. And fertilizer is 17% of agriculture's emissions, or 1.75% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. So if we reduced our emissions by 30% in Canada from all fertilizer sources, it would amount to 0.0028 of 1%. So that's really what we're talking about here. And I'm here to talk to you about agriculture technology, precision ag, slow release fertilizers, etc. Thanks for inviting me.
To Madame Emmanuelle Rancourt de
Miss Emmanuelle Rancourt from Vision Biomasse Québec. You have 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the committee members for inviting me to talk about this important issue. I'm sorry if I sound a little sickly. I just got over a cold. So Vision Biomasse Québec is a group of some 20 organizations from the cooperative, municipal, business, and environmental and rural development sectors. These organizations have chosen to unite with a common objective of promoting an exemplary and effective forest biomass heating sector in Quebec. So we participate in acquiring and disseminating know-how in the use of forest biomass for heat production through communication and awareness building activities. We contribute to structuring the sector by taking part in political representation activities. Together, these organizations have recently drawn up a vision for the sector that is full of promise and demonstrates the strong potential for this renewable energy sector. We have identified a potential for the conversion of building heating in Quebec outside of major urban centers, which would substitute 400 million liters of fossil fuels annually, valorize 1 million metric tons of residual forest biomass annually, avoid the emission of 1 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents per year, produce 4,000 gigawatts of renewable energy annually, improve Quebec's trade balance by $225 million, and to create 12,500 jobs during the construction phase and 3,600 permanent jobs. These values can certainly be increased if we apply this vision to all of Canada, and even more if we add industrial sectors that could consider conversion, such as cement and steel mills. Vision Biomasse Québec strongly believes that forest biomass as an energy source is a winning clean technology for Canada. The use of post-cutting, post-processing, and post-consumer forest residues for direct heating purposes is the most efficient energy conversion method compared to cogeneration and biofuel or hydrogen production. With higher efficiency, the carbon debt is reduced and the GHG balance is further improved. Its use in bioenergy sector would, in this case, only serve to cannibalize a more efficient use of the resource base. Being abundant in Canada, forest biomass is a local resource and is used as a replacement for fossil fuels will improve the balance of trade of several provinces by decreasing the value of imports by allowing energy security and independence. We have to think about markets. Millions of tons of forest biomass could be sold locally to create renewable energy and thus contribute to the country's energy transition. As a promising avenue for the domestic development of the industry is in remote communities. Some northern communities in several provinces and territories have already converted to using local forest biomass for heating. However, government funding programs are essential for these projects to be successful and to act as a showcase for the healthy development of this sector. The federal programs currently in place to support these conversions should be maintained and could be expanded and enhanced to accelerate conversions and thus the country's energy transition. In addition, some potential projects are falling through the cracks because the Treasury Board does not consider biomass to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which limits funding opportunities. A concerted effort between various ministries would be appropriate to standardize the status of this renewable energy. We have to stop here. In order to finish on time, we will have to reduce the time allotment by 1/3 for questions. So the first round will be 4 minutes, and we will be starting with Mr. Dreeshen.
Well, thank you very much, there, Mr. Chair, and thank you all the witnesses. Amazing testimony here this afternoon. Of course, Canadian farmers and ranchers are the most environmentally conscious in the world. And I think all that they ask is that progress is recognized when they're measured against global competitors. And I believe, Mr. Sake, you've pretty well hit the nail on the head of what we actually do, yet nobody wishes to talk about that particular fact. And I know that Alberta's always been a leader in carbon management, both whether it be in agriculture or in other industries. I'm wondering, Mr. Sake, if you could just discuss your experience in the carbon offset space, since your company is one of the leaders in this, and if you could talk about why we're not getting credit for that 132% of carbon sequestration that we have with the grains that we sell around the world. We don't get credit for the water that we put into it and sell and transfer of water around the world. I'm just curious if you could just talk to us about that, please.
Yeah, quickly, some cowboy math. For every 1% increase in organic matter in soils, farmers pull out of the air approximately 20 metric tons of carbon dioxide. I'll repeat that. For every 1% increase in soil organic matter, 20 metric tons of carbon dioxide goes into the soil. So in Western Canada alone, 70 million acres, 1% increase would be 1.4 billion. That's a B, billion tons of carbon dioxide of the atmosphere, if that was recognized by the government. So farmers are doing a lot. Yesterday, I went out to a farm and I spent some time on the on-farm climate action program, or OFCAF. And did you know that the farmer I was dealing with would not qualify for any support? Do you know why? He's already doing soil testing. He's already doing split nitrogen application. He's already using nitrogen inhibitors. He's doing crop rotation. So the work that the federal government wants us to do is already being done by farmers, but it's not being recognized. It's far better for us to be given incentives such as carrots rather than sticks, being told that we're going to reduce our nitrous oxide by 30% when we're already amongst the highest efficient nitrogen farmers in the world.
Well, there I am. Can you expand it as well as far as the cattle feeding industry is concerned? Because they also have done amazing things. And again, another sector that is not getting its due.
Well, when you think about the forest and my esteemed colleague who talked about biochar and the utilization of biomass, you take and you burn wood, and somehow that is a cycle that everybody recognizes. Well, the half-life of methane is 10 years. The half-life of carbon dioxide is 1,000 years. Carbon dioxide goes into plants. Cows eat those plants. They burp out methane. In 10 years, that methane starts converting back into carbon dioxide. So how did cows make more greenhouse gases? They don't. The only way cattle can make more greenhouse gas is if there's more cows. But the peak of the cattle herd is 1971. So if you take cattle away or demonize cattle, demonize the cattle industry, you've taken away one of the key ingredients that we use in agriculture to harvest cellulose and hemicellulose, and you put at risk one of the most fragile ecosystems in the world, which is the grasslands and the foothills of the province of Alberta, where you need a keystone species to keep the rose bushes and the poplars at bay. So a lot of people don't think about cattle, but it's a biogenic cycle, the same as biochar, the same as biomass.
Thank you. We'll have to go to Mr. Longfield now for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was listening with great interest to Mr. Sake and thinking of a conversation I had with the University of Guelph, where they're looking at measuring carbon from using satellite technology to be able to give credit to the farmers for the carbon levels that they are maintaining in the soils. Is that anything that you're familiar with?
Well, yes. There's a number of measurement devices that are being experimented with right now. If I said categorically there was one that you would depend upon, I would say no. They're still trying to do regression analysis to find out if these measurement devices, satellite imagery to ascertain carbon in soils is still a long way off. In Western Canada, a lot of the carbon is sequestered in the top 0 to 6 inches of the soil, but in Eastern Canada, you have more tillage and more rainfall. And so consequently, the carbon sequestration is deeper in the plow layer. I think pretty hard to ascertain all of that coming from satellite remote sensing imagery.
6 inches or whatever the baseline ends up being. But thank you for your testimony. That's very good for our study. I'd like to switch over to Mr. Smith, or Dr. Smith. I understand that you got your PhD in Guelph, which is always a good connection.
That's true.
And it's great that you're continuing to work on research. I've seen your research grants up to $65 million that also include some spin-off businesses, one of them being Bio's Agriculture, Inc., commercializing technology on the farm. Could you maybe expand on the clean technology opportunities for business spin-offs from the work that you're doing?
Sure. We are conducting work right now on developing technologies and, I guess, ultimately products out of plant microbe interaction. So I mentioned this in my introduction. You have these, they seem to be producing signal compounds. It's got, the microbes plus the plant is now considered the holobiont, and I've started calling these hormones of the holobiont because they work at hormonal levels. And they do have some profound effects on the plants. They increase their growth rates, and they also make them substantially more resistant to the kinds of stresses that are associated with climate change. So there's a lot of interest and a lot of interesting things that can be done with that. The original company, Bio's Agriculture, it had an interesting history. It actually went through the corporate food chain. It was taken up by a larger Canadian company, wound up with Novozymes and Bayer. But right now I'm working with two companies in my lab that are both spin-offs not spin-offs, I guess they're startups based on technologies from my lab. So, and there's a lot of interest in these technologies, and we're producing more as time goes by. I'm hoping to get some funding to focus just on that.
Great, thank you. To add to the NSERC funding, maybe we could get some other innovation funding, which we could talk about offline if I can help in any way.
I'd love to.
Mr. Chair, I know I'm going up to the 4-minute mark. I've got about a half a minute left. Ms. Rancourt, I'm very interested in the forest biomass that you talked about. One of the studies I read a few years ago had to do with taking wood chips and making some sawmills more viable by selling wood chips to the market. Is this the sort of thing that you'd be involved with?
Brièvement, s'il vous plaît.
Est-ce que vous pourriez...
Could you clarify the question, please?
Sorry, I'm thinking of the biomass products coming from wood chips from sawmills to make use of the biomass that would normally be a waste product in sawmills.
Oui, absolument.
Yes, that's what we consider post-transformation sources of biomass, which is one of the most common ones. Often sawmills will use their own residue to heat their factories and their wood dryers to have a circular economy. Ms. Posey, you have the floor for 4 minutes. Thank you. Thank you to our witnesses for being there. Ms. Rancourt, my questions are for you. I only have 4 minutes and many questions. First, let's talk about biomass. I was in Stockholm last spring, and there was a factory in the center of the city that was a coal factory, and it was using biomass, and it was providing energy for the whole city. If we did that, do you have an idea of the order of magnitude for the reduction of greenhouse gases? We have not assessed what would happen in Canada. We work in Quebec. We don't have a Canadian equivalent. I know that in BC there are organizations that might resemble ours that might have a better idea. This is an avenue we're exploring more and more. We're working with the Société Québécoise des Infrastructures that manages all of the Quebec government's real estate, and they are working on correctional facilities, for example. There's a good potential there to have a network built around heaters. It's difficult to get an idea of the potential reduction of greenhouse gases to come, indeed. So we know that the forestry industry is using forest waste from cutting or from wood that was damaged by insects or forest fires. So what are the environmental risks related to harvesting these residues? The main risks are the fragility of the soils. Forest residue, when it's leaving on the ground, helps to regenerate the ecosystem. So there's carbon and other elements that go back into the soil. They're important. So what's important here is to plan for a limit of residues that would be harvested to help protect the soil on the land. So we would have guidelines based on the fragility of the soil, the inclination, etc., and that would help us understand how much residue to leave on the ground. So that's what we're missing when we make recommendations. We tell people to take these elements into consideration, but we could have an official framework with official guidelines that would be very useful. We know that there are wood granules that have been used in the Northwest Territory. This is an example of forestry biomass, correct? So if you take into consideration the developments of the last years, do you see a potential for northern regions in Quebec and Canada as well? Yes, absolutely. This is one of the areas that has the most potential. the fact that they are very far, they're off the grid, they're not accessible to Hydro-Quebec, and they are very dependent on fossil fuels and propane, etc. This is an interesting avenue for those regions. The one issue here is that forestry biomass has to be within specific stringent standards to be useful. So the northern conditions make things a little bit more complex. But one solution would be roasted granules that would stabilize them and prevent them from being degraded by humidity. So that's one solution. Another issue is transporting the biomass to the north. We could use ships, but we need to explore those avenues to make sure that the supply chain is in place before we start moving into large projects in the north. Thank you. Ms. Collins, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question is for Ian Thompson with Advanced Biofuels. And you spoke a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act. It's so great to see the United States finally taking serious climate action. But it's also, we have this risk of lost opportunities here in Canada if our own action doesn't match the pace and scale proportionally of what the U.S. is doing. You mentioned a kind of growing sense of alarm about the impact of the IRA on the competitiveness in Canada's clean fuel sector. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're hearing from your members and talk a bit more about the broader implications on the transition to the low carbon transportation in Canada?
I thank you, Kennedy. Thanks very much for the question. Yeah, we are hearing, and I would say across the sectors, and this might come across as, all of us crying wolf, but all the way from my colleagues in the refining sector, a number of our members are refiners that make renewable fuels, but also in hydrogen, in renewable natural gas and biogas. I've spoken with my colleagues in those sectors over the last week, and there is across the board concern that the fiscal and financial provisions in IRA are so generous, and there's such a magnitude that there's really there are very few scenarios in which you could see a Canadian producer competing, because American producers are allowed to keep the credits that are in those programs when they export fuel, but the programs to date so far exclude Canadian product. So we're shut out of the American market by virtue of economics, and the Americans are allowed to load up our market with exported product. We've discussed the potential for things like trade action. We can't wait until 2026 to resolve this. And yes, there is across the board deep concern about the provisions.
Thank you. Can you expand just on the importance of clean technologies in transportation when it comes to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and meeting Canada's climate targets?
I'd be happy to. If you look at transportation is Canada's largest end-use sector, so it's the place where we get most of our GHGs, and it's a tough sector to decarbonize. So these technologies are really critical. Electrification, and Brian Kingston spoke earlier to some of the wins that Canada made with the Build Back Better, and that was tremendous to see. But we're going to still be reliant on internal combustion engines well past the middle of the century. And I don't say that because I'm skeptical of the alternatives. I drive an electric vehicle. It's great technology. And I'm just aware that we have to have every single solution at the table. And right now we do in Canada have a number of companies that are looking to put substantial volumes of really low carbon liquid clean fuels into the market, but a number of them are right on their final investment decisions. And when they look at the provisions in IRA, it's got to be causing them to hit the pause. Oh yeah.
The Clean Fuel Fund is providing $1.5 billion over 5 years. Applications for building clean fuels production capacity closed a year ago. How is the build out going for that fund?
25 seconds.
So We don't have a lot of insight into it, although I am getting feedback from some of my members that they're waiting a long time to see contribution agreements, et cetera, and it is generally regarded as a tough fund to access, and I get that you need to have appropriate measures, but again, if you're waiting for an agreement after a year, your project can't just sit on the shelf and wait. So there's some anxiety about that.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Mazier for 3.5 minutes.
Thank you for being here today. Unfortunately, I can't think of any other Canadian government who has vilified our farmers and our agriculture industry more than this current government. The attack on agriculture in the name of climate change is becoming so senseless that we now are seeing countries like New Zealand planning to tax burps from cows. Farmers are some of the most environmentally responsible people in our country. They use clean technology every day, and no one in this government gives them credit for that. Mr. Syke, if farmers increase their crop yields, they can sequester more carbon and therefore offset more greenhouse gas emissions. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've been working with farmers since my hair was light or dark colored, and now it's not. And I've never met in all the places I've traveled in the world, whether it's been Kazakhstan or South America, I've never met a farmer that wants to spend any more money on crop inputs than they need to. And the only way to feed a planet that's passing 8 billion people right away is through something called sustainable intensification. Sustainable intensification of agriculture is the way that we have to go in order to reduce our environmental footprint, protect the planet, and feed the planet at the same time.
Same amount of land is sustainable practice that we should strive to achieve? Yes or no?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes.
Would you agree that nitrogen fertilizer allows farmers to grow more crops on the same amount of land? Yes or no?
Well, yes. Absolutely, yes.
Would you consider synthetic fertilizer a clean technology?
Yes. I mean, the alternatives are what?
Exactly. So when this government announced that they were planning to reduce fertilizer emissions by 30%, farmers began to worry. They worried because fertilizer grows food. Does this government's fertilizer emission reduction plan make sense for Canada?
My concern as an agronomist with this whole thing is 30% from where? My understanding is the coefficient that they're using to calculate the reduction of 30% has a -30 and a +40 error in the standard deviation of the coefficient itself, meaning that just with the coefficient, we could be at -30 already. Nobody wants to release more nitrous oxide than needed into the atmosphere. That includes Canadian farmers. And like I said earlier, between soil testing, variable rate technology, nitrogen inhibitors, split application of nitrogen, we're doing all these things. So what else are we supposed to do? If you're going to try to achieve this target, the only way to do it is through an absolute reduction in fertilizer, which is absolutely ridiculous. The world needs more Canada, not less Canada right now.
And is there technologies that you're currently working on that, as far as in farming in particular, in agriculture, that would be useful for the study in technology?
15 seconds, please.
Yeah, I think all kinds of remote sensing technology, and again, bioengineering down the line, such as what's happening in Argentina with a company called BioSeries, which is producing wheat that's resilient to drought and saline soils. Those are examples of genetic engineering moving us in the direction of more sustainability.
Thank you. Mr. Weiler for 3.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for joining today. First question to Mr. Thompson. What role do you see the output-based pricing system and the clean fuel regulations playing in reducing emissions from the transportation sector and leading to fuel switching?
So the clean fuel regulation is a huge benefit. It will take time to come into effect. These regulations don't have an immediate effect, and we anticipate that probably by mid-decade is when you will start to see incremental actions that go beyond current provincial actions in the CFR. So very important. The output-based pricing system is more intended to address fixed facilities. So it's more of a facility-based one. There are carbon charge. The federal carbon charge is the other side of OBPS, and that's the one that applies to fuels. Hence our recommendation that the Pollution Pricing Act should really align with international practice, which is to fully waive biofuels from a carbon charge. So right now, anything that's above 10% renewable content in gasoline or 5% in diesel is exempted, but that's a lot of fuel under 10% in gasoline and 5% in diesel that's currently being taxed by the government, and there's no reason to tax it, and it's not best practice internationally. In fact, it's not even common practice.
Thank you for that. And you mentioned in some detail some of the concerns you have about competitiveness with the IRA coming into effect. Obviously, this is something that Canada needs to look at very closely. What level of urgency do you see some of the measures that you proposed to this committee and otherwise needs to be taken into account with how we're going to respond with measures in Canada?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And we are making those recommendations also in our pre-budget consultation submission. There is urgency to it. I mentioned that in 2026 is when the really troubling provisions do come into effect, but the kinds of facilities that produce these fuels take a half decade to build, and they're $500 million projects. And so if there is a looming threat to your market out in 2 or 3 years that you do not know whether you'll have resolve for under a trade action, you simply won't go ahead with the project. So it's going to have a chilling effect right now, hence our urgency to understand how our government can match the IRA provisions and provide parity for project developers here. And it appears to be, just on my conversations, a concern across the board. I anticipate you'll hear from both the conventional and the non-fossil sectors.
And if we don't see those investments taking place in Canada, what impact do you see that having on Canada's ability to reach our emission reduction targets by 2030 and to get to net zero by 2050?
It's conceivable that we could still meet them. We would be heavily reliant on imported product, and with global supply chain issues and the general concerns about energy security, I don't think that any of us would perceive that it's in our best interest to be import reliant for our clean fuels. And I think it will actually retard it. You can't sustain, I think, support for clean fuel technologies and clean technologies, period, unless Canadians can see themselves benefiting from jobs, from investments, they want to see it in their community. They don't want to be importing it and paying.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Posey, you have 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I have a question for Ms. Rancourt and one to Dr. Smith. Ms. Rancourt, we're talking about residual biomass. How can biofuels help us reduce the dependency on diesel for rural and remote regions in Canada, for example, Indigenous communities? So we're working on direct heat. This is the most effective way to extract energy. So more it's transformed, more there are emissions, and more we need to spend to produce it. So we're trying to go to direct heating for northern communities. This is very applicable because they have a great need for heating. For Hydro-Québec, in peak periods when it's very cold, when we have great needs for heat, this is where our products can help as well. There are peak periods where Hydro-Québec cannot respond to the needs. As for liquid fuels, I am not an expert in that field. I know that some people in the room have more experience, but we work specifically on solid biomass, which is burnt for heat. Dr. Smith, what measures can the federal government put in place to encourage the development of new biomass products in the forestry area specifically?
Be done in that? I mean, I think that there's the potential for addition of a number of new technologies. Just in the area where I work, we're clearly just beginning to open the doors on this, and there are a lot of potential technologies in there what we need is some funding to get that sort of tail-end research done to get it to the point where the materials could be moved to, I guess, applied research and ultimately to the market. Those sorts of things would help. I think in terms of some sort of support, I suppose, for initial startup companies recognizing the importance of this area and to get them moving quickly and to get them stable as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
Those are my guesses.
Thank you. Ms. Collins for 2 minutes.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again to Mr. Thompson, you're recommending establishing a low carbon fuel production tax credit. Can you expand more on how you'd like to see a tax credit applied? And a related question, you're also recommending converting the government's proposed CCUS investment tax credit into a production tax credit. And so can you explain a little bit more about how that would benefit biofuel production?
I can. So a clean fuel production credit would match what is in place in the U.S. It would give provisions for fuels like renewable diesel, sustainable aviation fuel, synthetic fuels made from direct air capture, et cetera. And it would look to align with the provisions in the US. The Americans have attached some carbon intensity provisions to their proposed incentives, which is appropriate. If you want to incent lower carbon fuels, then the rates are higher, and that's appropriate. It would be in the Income Tax Act, so that it would not be something that was subject to being a political football, quite frankly. And we hear from all of the fuel sectors, conventional and alternative, that stability of policy and signal is arguably the most important thing of all, in addition to the level. So the Americans would propose it would be for 3 years. We're proposing one that would go for the better part of a decade to give that long-term benefit. And the costs of these programs, by the way, do tend to go back into the fuels. So Canadians would be getting less expensive fuels as a result of this, and we're not kind of doubling up on the cost of fuels.
Thank you. We'll go now to Mr. Dreeshen for 3.5 minutes.
Thanks once again. I think, of course, natural gas is an important feedstock in fertilizer production. However, it's this government's fixation on hydrocarbon reduction that has initiated this narrative of fertilizer use reduction. But there's a lot of other things that can be done in agriculture. And Mr. Sake, there are some initiatives that are taking place, and I believe you've probably seen them. For example, exhaust management, putting the CO2 into the ground. I wonder if you could speak to some of these strategies and the significance of these other strategies that you see in the agricultural field.
Well, I think it's important to understand that every breath we take is 78% inert nitrogen. Every breath you take, every move you make should be a song. And it's the Haber-Bosch process that turns that inert nitrogen into fertilizer that ultimately supports 50% of the protein in every man, woman, and child on the planet Earth. It's also a question of how you sustain life on Mars when it's only 2.6% inert nitrogen. From a standpoint of what we can do in agriculture, some of the things I already talked about. So the ability for us to utilize nitrogen inhibitors to reduce the conversion of fertilizer into urea or fertilizer into nitrous oxide, those things are important. The ability for us to include methane reduction agents into feeding. So when you're feeding cattle, there are methane reduction agents being researched right now that can reduce the methane or the burps from cattle between 50 and 75%. Seaweed extracts are one of these. And so again, if you incent farmers to be able to do these things, they'll find ways to do these things. I think the most important thing we can do is grow more crop. And it takes 3.3 pounds of nitrogen to grow a bushel of canola, 1.5 pounds of nitrogen to grow a bushel of corn. The more corn you grow, paradoxically, the more root mass you have, the more carbon sequestration you have. So I think the idea of reducing nitrous oxide emissions from agriculture is laudable. But all the discussion, if we do this and achieve a 0.00028 of 1% reduction in Canada, this is not what we should be going after. We should be going after other things that make our farmers more productive and not looking at policies that are punitive on agriculture production in Canada.
Technologies are, of course, precision farming, and I'm just wondering if you could quickly, in this short time that we have left, describe where that is going.
Sure. So we're utilizing satellite technology or remote sensing technology to do biovegetation index maps. We take soil samples based on the zones that are in those biovegetative index maps. So satellites give us the maps. We go into the field, we soil test. Then agronomists like myself will make recommendations based on the amount of fertilizer that we want to hit based on the yield target. We put these into air seeders. And as the air seeders go across the field with GPS guidance, they regulate the amount of fertilizer to hit the target yield.
Thank you very much. Ms. Thompson for 3.5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and actually, Mr. Thompson. One of the best ways that we can rapidly reduce net emissions from fuels is to increase the use of biofuels. Would you be able to discuss the importance of biofuels in the transition to net zero economy?
Thank you. Great question. I would say, in short, they're indispensable. Modeling from the Canadian Climate Institute, from the IEA, from the California EPA, from the California Air Resources Board, all of them will tell us that we will have a lot of internal combustion engines around, as I've already mentioned. Fully 75% of the greenhouse gases that are emitted when you turn on a vehicle come from the crude oil in it, and the only way to address those 75% of emissions is to switch off something that's non-fossil. So that would be renewable natural gas or a biofuel or a synthetic fuel that's made from direct air capture. So 75% of transportation emissions, significant internal combustion engine fleets, we can't have them running on fossil fuels, even if those fossil fuels have slightly lower carbon emissions because of technology. You've really got to be fuel switching, which is why electrification is so important in light duty. In heavy duty, it's more difficult. Shipping, aviation, rail, long haul trucking are regarded as places where biofuels or synthetic fuels are going to be critical for decades.
Thank you. And Dr. Smith, if I could just go back to a point that you made in your last question around biofuel, biomass rather, and technologies. What role can government play to ensure that technology that is being developed is actually able to scale and have that real world impact?
I guess, as always, there's financial support. I mean, there's a need to, if you want them to be pushed all the way out. It's not always easy. I've gotten a number of research findings all the way to technologies and actual products, but a number of ones that I thought would succeed failed. And it's just because there was something missing at some step along the way. And if it comes to the point where you've got something, it's ready to out the door, but the right company's not there, or there's a company there, they could be the right company, but they just don't have the support. They're not growing and things like this. There's nothing making the move. So again, recognition of the importance of those specific areas and the need to do something to make it work. I think it would be nice if there was someone we could speak to, because sometimes each situation can be quite unique. And if so, there was somebody who could come to and say, "Look, we've got this situation right now where this technology, this company, but there's a piece missing in that bridge. Could you guys fill that missing piece?" Because it's not always the same. So a uniform policy doesn't always work. So.
Thank you, and Mr. Sake, I'll finish with you. If you could to go back to probably your last point and really explain to the committee how different types of precision farming techniques that thousands of farmers are already using can help significantly reduce emissions.
Well, again, I think this goes back to some fundamentals in sustainability. Number one, soil health. Number two, water use efficiency. Number three, greenhouse gas balance. Number four, farm viability. These programs that we're putting forward farmers need to be viable. And the fifth one actually is love. Farmers love their livestock, they love their land, and it's intergenerational. So we need to recognize that farming and agriculture is about learning, unlearning, and relearning. And the technologies that we're bringing together are at light speed. I think one of the Achilles heels, believe it or not, to bring agriculture more sustainable is broadband.
Okay,
we
thank
need
you.
broadband across the country.
We'll have to stop there. Thank you for a very interesting panel on the role, on what can be done in the agricultural sector to reduce emissions. So thanks again to all the panelists and to all the members for the excellent questions. We don't have a meeting on Friday because we have a meeting of the steering committee. So we'll see you after the, we'll see members after the Thanksgiving break. Have a good Thanksgiving.